Well, welcome officially to the webinar. My name is Jason Jones, and I am joined today by Paul Springer. I'm a managing principal with Cresa, and Paul is the senior vice president. This is the Cresa Hybrid Workforce webinar, how to affirm and operationalize your strategy. There's a workforce trend happening right now that's both frightening and exciting. Frightening because it can cause real disruption for any organization, but exciting because of its implications for the health of the economy, and exciting because of the possibilities that it provides for organizations who go on the offensive to capitalize on this trend. So I'm going to let the headlines do the talking. That frightening and exciting trend is, as this headline from a recent Forbes article describes, workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers as the U.S. experiences a booming job market. More headlines. In the Wall Street Journal, forget going back to the office. People are just quitting instead. Bloomberg Wealth, employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. Again from Forbes, companies who focus on their workers will win the war for talent when offices reopen. And finally, from the New York Times, how do they say economic recovery? I quit. Quoting from the article, quote, with new opportunities and a different perspective as the pandemic eases, workers are choosing to leave their jobs in record numbers. And here's the proof. A chart from the US Labor Department. This shows the number of US workers leaving their jobs as a percentage of total employment. And this ratio is called the quits rate. And quits mean voluntary separations of people leaving their jobs. This is a good barometer of worker confidence in their ability to get another job. A few key numbers for context. The low point on this graph, which goes all the way back to 2001, is September of 2009. This is just coming out of the Great Recession. Hardly anyone was voluntarily leaving their job, and the quits rate was 1.2%. Then the economy began to improve over time, and the number of people leaving their jobs voluntarily, quitting, increased. But then the pandemic hit, and the quits rate plummeted to 1.5% in April of 2020. However, coming out of the pandemic, 1 year later in April of 2021, the quits rate skyrocketed a whopping 80% to 2.8%, the highest level since at least 2000. Now, in May, it decreased to 2.5%, still well above the 20-year history. But then in June, this is the numbers that we have the most recent information for, it jumped back up again to 2.7%, nearly as high as it has ever been. So, what can be done about it? What are organizations doing to recruit and retain in the midst of this war for talent? Well, some are offering raises and bonuses. Some are extending perks, such as free Pelotons and Apple products. Others are taking the time to design engaging office environments. Google is a good example. They're building and repurposing their offices to make them inviting, using ideas like cool outdoor hangouts called teepees with team meetings, or for their team meetings. They're trying to make the office a place where you want to go and, candidly, are willing to do the commute. And finally, many forward-thinking companies are planning flexible, hybrid workforce strategies that leverage both what they learned about remote work over the past year and combine that with the time-proven benefits of a shared office. Ford Motor Company is a good example. Ford has announced a really progressive hybrid workforce strategy for 30,000 of its office-based employees who can, quote, continue to work from home indefinitely and have flexible hours approved by their managers. You have to understand that's coming from a 100-year-old manufacturer in the staid auto industry. I think this quote by Kirsten Robinson of Ford is both insightful and humble. She says, if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 12 months, it is that a lot of our assumptions around work and what employees need has shifted. So the question most organizations are asking is, if a hybrid workforce strategy can help recruit and retain the best and the brightest, then what should be the balance for my organization between remote and office? In other words, what is the right hybrid blend? And then once we've decided on what the right blend is, how do we put it into practice fairly, equitably, without opening ourselves up to any blind spots that we didn't think of in advance? Clearly, you need a plan. You need a plan to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. But every plan is going to be unique to every organization and likely unique to each department within an organization. Many businesses feel just like the person on the screen. There's so many paths to choose from, so many variables to consider, and so many possible outcomes. Many organizations feel stuck, and they're struggling to build consensus on a way forward. So if you're interested in answering questions like, what is the right blend for our organization? And what are the criteria for a successful hybrid strategy? What is the roadmap to navigate to the right blend of remote work in the office? And finally, how do we operationalize our strategy and put it into action? If so, then this is the webinar for you. As I mentioned, my name is Jason Jones, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Paul Springer. I've been at Cresa for 18 years, originally as a real estate advisor, but now exclusively leading 2 of our service lines, Cresa Business Technology Sourcing and Hybrid Workforce Services. Paul has over 25 years of experience working with nonprofit and for-profit organizations, integrating human resources, operations, IT, and real estate. Today, we'll have a 50-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end. We'll record the webinar and send a copy out afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time throughout the presentation. Don't wait till the end so that you have to remember what your question is. Just put it in as you think of the question and insert comments along the way. Things that you think are interesting or something that you've experienced and you want to share with everyone else. We really appreciate that, and we'll get to all of them during the Q&A period. So today, we're going to address, number 1, context for where we are in the timeline of the COVID-19 experience from a work perspective. It's the benefits and challenges of a hybrid workforce strategy, its key elements, and a roadmap to affirm and operationalize your hybrid workforce strategy. So we start with context for the timeline of the pandemic. Phase 1 was the immediate phase. Overnight, people were forced to work from home. Phase 2 is the endure phase. We continue to endure, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, and maintaining culture. Phase 3 is the future sustain and compete phase. Now, this is the post-pandemic phase. Organizations will strive to sustain a new way of working that leverages what they learned about remote work, while capturing or recapturing all of the benefits of a shared office. But to get from phase 2 to phase 3, you've got to go through a transition. And that is where we are right now. But before leaders can move forward with a specific transition plan, they have to ask a key question. This is a question that addresses this key workforce desire to continue working from home part-time. And this key question is one that we suggest you too ask yourself. And that question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that will, number 1, be reflective of our culture, and then also minimize expenses and the threat to business continuity, while at the same time maximizing productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results. So it's these key business drivers that inform our planning process for a hybrid strategy. And in order to evaluate different strategies, we start by understanding the benefits and the challenges. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy combine the best of remote work and the best of the shared office. Now, I want to pause for just a moment and make a quick point. It may seem on the surface elementary to review the benefits and the challenges of this because we've all experienced these things, having worked both in the office and now a significant amount of time at home. However, it's important when your organization begins the planning process as a team to level set and reach agreement on these benefits and challenges because each person brings their own bias to the planning process. For example, introverts have been loving working at home. Extroverts have been dying to get back to the office to be around people more often. And that's just one example of the different feelings that people bring with them. And there's a tendency to lift up the benefits and play down the challenges of the workforce strategy that they like best. So to foster objectivity, we highly recommend you start your process of affirming and operationalizing your hybrid workforce plan with an agreement on the benefits and challenges of both. Now, at the top of the list of the benefits for remote working is a reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These, of course, increase productivity. Other potential benefits are the reduced expense of real estate, employee turnover, absenteeism, and the personal costs of reduced commute, clothes, and food. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state their work-life balance is better. On the other hand, the benefits of the office are time-proven and have really crystallized during the pandemic. Highlights on the screen include things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring and serendipitous moments. Now, one benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. Multiple surveys show that at least 70% of employees want a hybrid workforce experience, both office and work from home. Therefore, organizations will have to offer some degree of flexibility between home and office to put themselves in position to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. However, even with all the benefits of hybrid workforce environments, there are several challenges to plan for. And we're going to highlight 3 scenarios that organizations could be faced with in a post-COVID hybrid workforce environment. And the first challenge is the potential for disparity between teams. Let's take Team A. Team A has a manager who embraces hybrid work. She's on board with the concept of giving you freedom to choose where and when you feel you'll be the most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your efforts, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. Then there's Team B. Team B has a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of a hybrid workforce. He's uncomfortable managing people he cannot see and requires in-office presence, although he does allow remote work 1 day of the week. When Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained. So what is the outcome? Team B feels jealous and dispirited. They wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? Another challenge is internal division within a hybrid team. In this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time or majority in office, and then we have remote team members who are either full-time or majority remote. If the boss spends most of her time in the office, then in-office team members have proximity to her that remote members do not. And this proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information. What's the upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced, and they may wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave this organization? If you're the vice president overseeing this team or this department, what do you do? How do you prevent this scenario? And one more challenge of a hybrid workforce regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when an employee chooses to work. For example, Profile number 1 are employees who choose to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or perhaps the other way around. Profile number 2 are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance that if they need to take an afternoon or a day to work remotely, no big deal. And profile number 3's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person team meetings and occasionally choose to drop in the office to work or to socialize. The challenge is, how do you accommodate all of these profiles? What are the critical requirements from each department of your organization to support them? Now, this next slide is really key to awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. The question is, what should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles? At the same time, should you even allow all of these profiles? Is it any wonder why so many organizations feel stuck in their planning? So those were 3 challenging scenarios, but here are some of the top challenges that result from those scenarios. You'll see the list developing on the screen. These looming issues showcase the need for organizations to invest time right now preparing for the future, brainstorming solutions, building consensus, and casting a vision, ultimately creating a hybrid workforce strategy that not only addresses these challenges, but also leverages its benefits to maximize productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and financial results. So to accomplish this, Cresa has developed conceptual frameworks and practical roadmaps to tie all of the components of a hybrid working together into a cohesive strategy, and then to help operationalize the strategy with a sustainable plan. And the first key framework is a concept called be sequential to be successful. This is the best place to start and get your feet on the right path, and it all starts at the top. We believe that the 2 most important elements of success are leadership and culture. They are the umbrella which overhangs all success. Then, the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and maximizing financial results informs all decisions and drives behavior. And to support these business goals, you must follow a sequential path, starting with workforce strategy, followed by workplace strategy and design, and then real estate strategy. Too often, organizations skip the human component of workforce strategy and they go straight to step 2 or step 3. Here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which leads naturally to step 3. Be sequential to be successful. And when workforce strategy is addressed first like this, it gives you the freedom to design your workplace with the confidence that you're basing the design of the real estate strategy on meaningful information, but also that your real estate strategy won't have to change and adapt to a changing workforce strategy at some point down the road. You want to build your workplace design and real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. So with that in mind, we're going to focus on the 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. The process is best thought about in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to determine and affirm the strategy. Phase 2 is to operationalize the strategy. Now, step 1, determine and affirm the strategy, is easy to say, but harder to do. Even those of you who have already determined your strategy may feel compelled to reassess key building blocks of your strategy in light of what you learned today. At a high level, you'll need to decide whether the strategy is fully remote, fully office, or some hybrid blend of the 2. But this is also a decision around whether this is an organization-wide mandate, or will the choice of the strategy be left to the discretion of departmental and team leaders? Who's going to be making the decision? Now, once you've made these decisions, you can move on to phase 2 and steps 2 through 5. and operationalize your strategy. But the first step is actually quite complex. So we're going to walk through a roadmap for making this decision in a thoughtful, methodical manner that contemplates and aligns all of the key departments of your organization. So in order to effectively implement a sustainable hybrid strategy, you've got to ensure that your entire organizational structure is prepared to support the plan's success. And by organizational structure, we're really referring to what we call critical requirements for a successful plan that are specific to each department. And you can see the departments listed on the screen. You'll need to ask, are all of our departments aligned and prepared? What gaps might there be in their ability to support the strategy long term? And oh, by the way, this is what top talent is looking for when they consider joining your organization or contemplate whether they should stay in your organization. They want to know, number one, what is your strategy and its guidelines? And then number two, they want assurance that the organizational structure is in place to support the strategy and their success. So this slide shows the details of the critical requirements by department. This is the checklist that every organization should work through when deciding on and affirming their chosen hybrid workforce strategy. At Cresa, we help organizations evaluate all of these requirements in a thoughtful, methodical manner, and we believe this is a key differentiator for our firm. We don't know anyone else who starts the real estate strategy by evaluating critical requirements of an upstream workforce strategy. Now, we're going to send an email with this list to all attendees, so no need to jot down every bullet point right now. And this is one of the major takeaways from the webinar. But we are going to go through some of these in detail for a few of these departments in the next few moments. But if you would like to have a deeper conversation about your specific situation, please contact myself or Paul. We'll have our contact information up at the end of the webinar, or reach out to the Cresa advisor who invited you to this webinar. So to go into a little bit more detail of the human resource critical requirements, I'm going to reintroduce my colleague, Paul Springer. Paul is our human resource and operations subject matter expert. He has over 25 years of experience integrating human resources, operations, IT, and real estate. And Paul, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Jason. So, as Jason mentioned, one of the most critical departments to a successful hybrid workforce strategy is human resources. Just a few of the critical requirements for HR to effectively support hybrid work starts with job roles. Related to job roles within an organization, interestingly, although many organizations went to 100% remote during COVID-19 or earlier in the pandemic, that doesn't mean that all roles moving forward are suitable for full-time work from home. Many roles, as we know, can be done remote, but the better question is, should they be done remote, and does their job description align with these roles being done remote? In order to achieve the highest productivity, you need to determine if a role has dependencies or requires in-person collaboration and resources in the office. Now onto personal aptitude. Additionally, if roles are suitable for remote work, the job processes need to have a clear alignment with the hybrid workforce strategy. This could mean automation of paper-based processes and digitizing files, reviewing systems, or understanding how best to collaborate, whether in the office or using technology. That leads to training for managers and employees. Managers may benefit from training to better manage a dispersed team that includes both people at home and in the office at any given time, which is a shift from what we had in the past. In addition, the technology that enables remote work is constantly changing, and many employees don't know how to use the full suite of technology that's available to them. Another key component to this strategy is eligibility, which requires that you ensure transparent and equitable criteria and eligibility guidelines. These should be memorialized, as Jason shared, and communicated clearly to increase transparency in the organization. Lastly, a key component of this strategy is the employee handbook. Many businesses are only really focusing on the hybrid or remote work policy and procedures. However, with a dispersed team, the entire employee handbook requires a detailed review of an update to ensure that policies are written to align with both remote and in-office audience. In addition, we recommend the use of an intranet or other automated communication platform to enable employees to easily access and clearly understand the employee handbook, no matter where their work location. A key part of the handbook is, as we shared, is a written hybrid workforce policy. These policies should include the following items and should be addressed as including eligibility requirements, tools and resources that the company will provide for home use. In addition, what the employees is expected to provide. Things like basic standards for internet, a clean and quiet place to work, and an overall professional location for them to do their work. Expectations for personal performance and participation. And then lastly, what constitutes disqualification? So moving on, a clear policy is crucial to setting expectations. And as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own, and they will likely be different from yours. So Jason, I turn it back over to you to discuss technology, our next critical area.
Thank you, Paul. So technology is the critical tool that enables a hybrid workforce. It's what connects employees to each other and to their work, no matter where they are or when they're working. And every company needs the optimal technology stack for their unique needs. But with advances in technology moving so fast, not everyone has had the opportunity yet to fully evaluate and optimize their environment with the most current technology, software and systems. 4 key areas to evaluate are, number 1, communications and collaboration. So there are synchronous and asynchronous forms of communication. These are constantly changing and upgrading, and you need the right stack of both and the right integrations among them. They ought to work together seamlessly and connected. Second is performance management. This is the software that helps answer the question, how do I know that my workers are actually working? And how productive are they? There are many software applications on the market to choose from, which can measure key performance indicators and really help your leaders out in managing remote employees. And these software tools, they're actually part of a larger performance management system, which aligns employee incentives and goals to company vision and values. It's really powerful stuff. Document management is really important. We're seeing a lot of requests for this right now. Remote workers must have access, easy access, to a central database of information that they use to get work done and to share with other team members. At the same time, many companies are reconfiguring their office space now that they're looking at a hybrid strategy, and they're looking to purge existing paper, and looking over the horizon, they want to leverage virtual tools to better manage documents and workflows. And finally, there's cybersecurity and compliance. With so many bad actors out there, it's critical that your data and all communication be secure. Think about a company that works with social security numbers and birth dates or personal health information. Corporate liability is high, but the good news is that there are many companies that provide excellent tools and services to protect against these risks. And Cresa has an entire service line called Business Technology Sourcing that consults and helps negotiate for all of these areas. So one more key component we want to talk about of a workforce strategy is the real estate that supports the people. This is the physical space that employees occupy. But the concept of office space has really changed dramatically because of the pandemic. To accommodate employees' desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations must now view the workplace as a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand places. Employees want the option to choose a workplace location where they feel they will be the most productive for that day, or even just part of the day, which means freedom of movement is important, whether between workplaces or even internally inside of the shared central office. But at the same time, and this is super important, in order to really make this effective, leaders must be purposeful about their frequency and the medium of collaboration, in person or virtual. Team leaders must be intentional about when to use the medium of the office versus when to use the medium of digital tools for meetings and collaboration. People are more sensitive now to investing the time it takes to meet in person. You don't want them wondering, why did I make the commute and come all the way into the office for this meeting? Did we really need to be here? Leaders will need to model the behavior of being organized and prepared and purposeful about how to make the best use of everyone's time and build a culture of purposeful collaboration. Now, to make it easier to visualize the 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your strategy, we developed a roadmap to guide you through both phases of that process. And this is the core of our workforce strategy consulting. It all starts with phase 1, which is step 1, to affirm the strategy. As a reminder, this is to clearly state whether your organization is fully office, fully remote, or some degree of a hybrid blend. And as importantly as it is to state, it is as important to state, is this a one-size-fits-all organization-wide mandate, or to what degree the decision will be delegated to departmental and team leaders. We always begin with a vision and goals session. This is where you build the project team, establish goals, and set a timeline. Next, you'll go through the process of discovery, conducting interviews, surveys, and focus sessions to gather information about the critical requirements. Then you'll analyze by identifying gaps in the critical requirement preparedness and determine solution. This phase ends with an internal affirmation of your strategy. So we think that's important to, even if you've already determined your strategy right now, as you're looking forward to operationalize it, go back, make sure, do you have the consensus you need? Have you considered all of the angles, all these critical requirements, and then affirm that strategy. Phase 2 is the subject of the rest of the webinar. It encompasses steps 2 through 5 to operationalize the strategy you've chosen. So let's talk about criteria and guidelines. This is when, at step 2, you'll determine the criteria and guidelines for implementation. By this, we mean specifics around when people will be working in the office versus remote. And examples include X number of days of the week in the office, or instead, perhaps, X% of the time in the office, which provides a little bit more flexibility in management and in setting the policy. And there may be variations for specific employees based on their job and travel requirements, as opposed to a blanket policy. We also recommend that you consider categorizing each employee to help communicate the plan throughout your workforce with transparency and equity. Next, you'll need to memorialize the plan. Now, this means not only putting the plan in writing, but also documenting specific human resource policies, updating job descriptions, contracts, and of course, creating a dynamic schedule that details where and when employees are working, and also utilizing space and resource allocation software that can help with hot desking or hot seating, and conference room scheduling. Now, after clear documentation, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, you'll need to prepare a very clear communication and change management plan. It's critical that you anticipate the effect of your strategy on culture and operations. Preparing a 12-month communication playbook is really going to put you in position to manage that change smoothly. Things to include in the playbook are a roadmap of key milestones, a plan for which communication vehicles that you're going to utilize, whether it's Slack, newsletters, town halls, etc., and even like a mini library of pre-planned internal messaging, which will help you avoid being caught flat-footed in the coming months, given certain contingencies. Finally, with any major change, such as a new workforce strategy, you should assess, recalibrate, and ultimately evolve over time. You should review the strategy every 3 months after the initial rollout in order to ensure continuous improvement and that the strategy continues to be aligned with the organization's mission. Allow your organization to experiment with new ideas. Solicit feedback along the way, both formal and informal, and then take the initiative to make changes to ensure that you're achieving those fundamental goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and achieving the best financial results. So going back a little bit, do you remember at the beginning of the webinar when I was discussing the benefits and challenges of working in the office versus working remotely? And I pointed out that everyone comes to the table with their own perspective and an inherent bias for either working remotely or working in the office. And I gave the example of introverts versus extroverts. This bias can put undue influence on the outcome of the planning process. Well, in addition to Cresa providing significant knowledge and experience working with multiple companies to affirm and operationalize their strategy, we also help our clients bridge the gap between these different viewpoints of the organization. And this helps ensure that a potentially subjective process remains an objective process in order to arrive at the best strategy for your organization. So Cresa offers 3 tier levels in support of navigating this roadmap to a hybrid workforce strategy. And tier 1 is really focused on operationalizing a plan after we review our client's own discovery activities and their workforce strategy decision. Tier 2 spends more time helping our clients with discovery in collaboration with key leaders of the organization. We conduct stakeholder interviews, focus sessions, and surveys. And Tier 3 takes an even deeper dive across more of the organization during the discovery process. And of course, we often modify these tier levels collaboratively with our clients. Sample deliverables from our consulting engagements include an executive summary, updated hybrid workforce policies, sample work agreements, a 12-month communication plan, sample job descriptions, a decision matrix to help teams finalize their strategy, and sample employee letters, perhaps thanking them for participating in company surveys and messaging to roll out the ultimate strategy. So with that, let me offer a summary. The desire for freedom is changing where and when we work. As important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice requires that most organizations develop a hybrid workforce strategy, unique to them, their culture, and their business. And to get there, transition is key. How you transition to this new hybrid working environment will determine how competitive you will be to attract and retain talent and to compete with other organizations in the marketplace. And finally, be sequential to be successful. This is really important. Don't skip steps. Before you operationalize a strategy, be sure that your organizational structure can support it downstream. Build your plan on solid information gathered from all the departments of your organization to ensure alignment and preparedness. And then follow through on all the steps for implementation. That way you'll be in a better position to evaluate ongoing feedback and make continuous improvements. Now, there's one last thought that we want to leave you with. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off of aircraft carriers. So I know that the Navy is an organization that runs on planning, training, and leadership, especially leadership. Similarly, implementing corporate programs that involve significant change requires the same 3 elements. But planning and training don't happen without leadership. This is a time that calls for leaders to determine the right workforce strategy and then to operationalize it. So be thoughtful in your planning, train your people, but most importantly, be the leader who seizes this opportunity for a new and more advantageous workforce strategy. So thank you all very much for attending today. On the screen is contact information for myself, also for Paul. Steve Ike is our information technology and operations expert. He was unable to join us today, but we've got his information on there as well. And we also wanted to say, if you have questions, even after this webinar, or you would like to have a conversation about things that you may not have thought of yet, or you're interested in what other organizations are doing, please reach out to us or the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. So with that, we're going to stop share, bring our pictures up, and let me take a look at the Q&A to see what questions have come in throughout the webinar. Here is, and that's good, we've got 15 minutes. So here's the first one, which is, Jason, who is typically included in the workshop, the consulting engagement that you mentioned, that roadmap? That's easy. So we always recommend that you include leaders from different departments in the organization, whether it's with our process and our roadmap, our engagements, or when you're doing this on your own. It's really important to get leadership and build consensus from different parts of the organization, because this is a group effort, and it's going to affect everyone, and every department has a role in supporting the strategy. So at a minimum, we recommend Chief of Human Resources. We believe that the CIO with technology is critical. And then there's typically someone from operations and finance, and oftentimes there's the CEO or the president of the organization. So I would say, Paul, do you have anything to add to that? Any others that you would recommend? I think those are the key.
You know, I think very much aligned with what you just said. A lot of businesses have some sort of a leadership team, and that leadership team includes programmatic and operational leaders, which it's important to have both. So it's important to have the CIO and the head of HR and some of the people you mentioned, but it's also equally important to have those programmatic, those sales leaders, those leaders that have specific needs within the organization, which may differ from an operational perspective.
Yeah, that's true. And that's another reason why to get people from different parts of the organization, because they have different needs. Right. Paul, I think this is good from you. What are some gotchas or things we may not be thinking of, and what can we do to avoid them? The unintended outcomes we didn't see coming.
So I think you'll probably hear me say this a lot through various questions that we got throughout the webinar, but planning and kind of being proactively ready for whatever situation comes up is important. In this particular case, we know that people are going to be dispersed. They may be working in other locations, potentially in other states, maybe even other countries. You know, with video conferencing technology, if your role enables you to do that, you can pretty much work from anywhere. However, the gotchas relate to the realities of people working in those places. So there may be situations where employment contracts are out of date, job descriptions are inaccurate now, compensation isn't aligned with the locations where they're working or their role moving forward. Could also be something as kind of straightforward as the business may not be set up to do payroll or have benefits in a certain location. So it may be that someone works in a certain place, but the business may not be operationally ready for that location. So it's those things that are kind of the basic requirements for any HR department, but as you're shifting and having more of a dispersed team, you don't have everyone in that headquarters location. And so you need to make sure that your operations align with having a team pretty much in any location.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. There's a couple others that are coming in. Here's one. How do we create a hybrid workforce policy that meets the needs of, this is interesting, of both employees and the company? So I think the question here is just pointing out sort of that inherent tension that I think a lot of organizations are feeling between employees wanting to work from home more often than leadership or managers wanting them to come into the office a little bit more. So how do we create a policy that meets the needs of both? Paul, any thoughts?
So, yeah, I think a couple of the slides that you covered in this presentation very much align with this question. So, you know, there are areas where you want to make sure that you get the perspective of the employees, of the managers, and then align that with the business and the culture overall. So some of the best practices and the steps that you mentioned earlier around affirming the plan, around going through that discovery process where you're learning a bit more through surveys and other
Yeah.
means to get information from employees, et cetera. You want to make sure that you're including in your planning the perspective of both employees and the leaders, and then making sure that as you move forward, you're incorporating both.
Yeah. I just think that this boils down to being purposeful about your communication and purposeful about the process that you go through to ultimately create your strategy and implement it, right? Because when you are thoughtful and purposeful about that, you're going to be reaching out and getting information from employees, making them feel like and truly making them part of this solution, at a minimum from understanding what their desires are. And clearly there are times when the organizational needs trump some of the employee needs, but at the same time, the employees make up the organization. So I think it's all about being purposeful about that process and reaching out to them and communicating clearly.
Agreed.
So here's another one. Will you be sending a copy of the presentation? Yes, we will. I will send out first a brief survey, a 5-question survey that we really would hope that you would just take the time to click some answers. It helps us get better, and we're always improving and updating this webinar, which we've been doing for 8 months now. But we will also send out a link to a digital version of this webinar, and you're welcome to forward that to other people in your organization and in other like-minded organizations. So, as well as, by the way, you'll get a copy of the recording of the webinar. So here's another one. How do we maintain a positive culture with some employees working at home while others are in the office? And Paul, I think this is speaking to that tension between, hey, I have to go to the office. We've heard this with some of our clients.
Right.
They've had some employees that are upset. It's sort of the old, it's not fair. And then there are others that can do their work from home. So how do you work to maintain a positive culture when that happens?
So for me, there's 3 words that are very important as it relates to a hybrid workforce strategy. Those words are transparency, equity, and consistency. So you need to make sure that as you're working through the collaboration efforts within your organization, that number one, you have the right technology in place to enable you to do that, the right training for managers and employees in place, but also you need to make sure that, as I mentioned a few moments ago, that as you're implementing all these different components to this item, that you really are focused on equity, consistency, and transparency. And that aligns well with the communication plan, playbook that you were talking about before, and some of the other strategies which really enable you to have that communication in place. And also, this very much aligns with performance management and productivity management, productivity measurement as well. So you want to make sure that because you have a dispersed team, that you're not losing sight of those ongoing performance discussions, those feedback opportunities, those meetings with your managers and employees, and really continuing to have those time-tested, and items that work well within an organization, but with an understanding that those are going to be done in a different way, and align with the technology that we've already been using for a year and a half around the country.
That's very good. Here's one more that I think is also quite relevant and interesting, and it is around, do you have insights into the percentage of companies offering furniture and technology for the home office? They're talking about stipends here, and how much. And Paul, I think another one to add to it, this wasn't asked, but I think it's worth at least addressing because it's out there, is I think everyone would be interested to hear you give a perspective on mandatory vaccines, mandating that employees get vaccinated. So talk first about the furniture and technology, the costs, ranges for stipends and things like that, and then maybe address the vaccine.
So I'll do the easy one first, the stipends and allowances and furniture needs. So many businesses are moving to a place where if if they're allowing people to work from home, it's not just you work from home and you incur the expense for setting that up. Businesses want to make sure people are productive when they're working from home, because they're implementing a policy and a strategy that enables people to work from home for a large percentage of time. So many businesses feel the obligation to also do right by those employees and enable them to set up those home offices that way. The answer to the question really depends on the size and the budget of the organization. The best practice is to give about $1,500, and we recommend doing that more in an allowance than in a stipend, because there's tax implications if you do a stipend. However,
Very good.
Around 1,500 is typically around 500 for technology, around 1,000 for furniture, and you kind of have to keep in mind the type of furniture that people are purchasing and enable and give them enough money to purchase that type of furniture. The other side of that is, like I said, you have to make sure it's aligned with your budget. So if you're a smaller nonprofit and you only have 250 or 500 to give to people, then you do what you can, and people will appreciate that. But the best practice is around 1,500.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add real quick. I think that is important for a recruiting and retention perspective, right? Is to show, even if you can't give everything that maybe somebody else is giving, at least if you're communicating, here's what we're doing, here's why. Again, comes down to communication, just showing that your employees, that you care about them, you care about their success and their growth and their career path, and that they can perform well for your organization. I think that goes a really long way.
And again, something that we've mentioned, these aren't one size fits all plans, and they need to be reassessed every 3 months or so in order to ensure that they're aligned with the business. So some businesses have offered lower amounts and then have come back and said, you know what, we realized that wasn't enough, and done another 250 or added some additional amount. So there's nothing to say that you can't tweak that as you go, as you're aligning with the future needs of your business.
Yeah.
And then the other piece around the vaccination, that's an interesting one. And any of you that have been watching the news or reading social media, you'll see that answer has kind of been changing. So initially, when people were talking about return to office and hybrid strategies, a lot of businesses were saying, we definitely can't mandate this. This is something that we're not going to ever do. And, we're strongly going to encourage them, but we're going to be very flexible. We're seeing with the Delta variant, we're seeing a lot of businesses shifting to a requirement for that. And obviously, it depends on the type of business and the type of industry they're in. But there's a lot of businesses, for the safety of their staff, that are moving in a direction that they were talking about not going to a couple of months ago. And so around that, businesses are also offering incentives for people to get the vaccine if there's a population that isn't comfortable or doesn't want to get them, keeping in mind that there are some religious and medical exceptions to that, but it is legal to do that, and many businesses are starting to go that way. So like I said, offering those incentives to enable people to do that better. And that could be days off, that could be money, that could be various incentives, but businesses are trying to encourage people to do that without forcing the mandate.
Very good. Well, that was the last question. I'll give it just a second or two as we close out. If anybody has anything else they'd like to add, again, even a comment. But as I'm talking, please go ahead and send a question if you'd like. But we greatly appreciate everyone's time and attention here. Again, look for an email from me this afternoon with a recording, a link to a copy of the webinar, and please reach out to us if you have questions or would like to have a discussion about your particular organization or things that we're seeing out in the market on what's happening, because this is changing, and we're keeping our finger on the pulse of these changes. So it doesn't look like there's anything else. So again, I'm Jason Jones. This is Paul Springer. We're with Cresa. Thank you very much. We hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.